Hey reader, welcome back to the channel. And today we're doing something a little bit different. We completed our series looking at the scenarios that are in the main book for Bolt Action 3rd edition that you can expect to play. And today we're looking at a scenario taken from the Commander's Compendium, which was created by David Hesselfeldt and Bo Mortensen from the Danish side of Bolt Action. So today I just thought, since I'd played this at a recent tournament that I went to, that I would just give you guys a quick review, kind of in the same style that I did before. So, taking a look at what the victory conditions are, what the high performing units are likely to be, which units are more likely to struggle in this scenario, so that we have an idea roughly on what you can expect if you're building an army for take all comers, as well as any deployment or terrain considerations. Now, typically in the when I reviewed the third edition scenarios, I also included and these are some changes that I would make with a tie back to the Zern mission pack. I'm not going to be doing that today. One, because this is a pack in and of itself. It is a change on the rules because this is kind of like key positions, but it's kind of like hold until relief, but it's kind of not like any of them. It is its own thing, but also because it's really good, actually, from somebody who has both played it as well as somebody just looking at it and theory crafting how people would build lists and how specific skew builds may or may not play unevenly or unfairly on this. I'm just going to be honest. This scenario speaks to people who have played a lot of games at a lot of levels of competition, have seen a lot of shenanigans and quirks and skew options, and they built a scenario accordingly. And it plays really, really well. There are still some ways to skew, obviously. Certain army builds are going to do better than others. But there aren't any like before turn one even begins, ha, this is in the bag, it's ours, with maybe one exception. And that's not a skew build. That's just an army special rule that we're going to talk about when we get to that point, because thanks to the tournament that I went to, I do actually have some data on this. And I do think that there's one specific nation that one should consider looking at, that will give you pause if you're not that nation and you're playing against them, or that would give you a bit of an edge going into the scenario, if that is the nation of your choice. So to start off with, what is this scenario? So first of all, there are some deployment restrictions. First of all, there's no outflanking allowed in this, which I think is wise, as you'll soon see. There's also no infiltration, which I think is actually the more important one. Outflanking technically could be fine because of how outflanking works in 3rd edition, and we'll talk about this when we get to the scoring side of things. But if there were infiltration allowed on this could be pretty darn dangerous, not only because, and they do clarify this elsewhere in the pack, one of the optional rules you can include is that you do have to deploy at least 12 inches from a deployment zone edge with your infiltrator. So it avoids the whole really, really mean way of doing infiltrator units where you basically don't allow the enemy to be able to come on through normal deployment. And so if there was no outflanking, but there was infiltration, that would be problematic. But second, and more than that, the infiltration would allow you to start the game, especially if you get one of the first dice out, to very quickly start controlling the objectives, and that could make it nigh impossible to beat you. And so I think this is really wise. I think removing both of these, you don't need infiltration or outflanking in order to win the scenario, but it does help to avoid some skew builds that might cause this to become very highly swingy, where we'll automatically be flowing in the direction of one team over and against another. Okay. And the way the scoring works is that unlike key positions, which has, up to 7 objectives present, this one has 9, and they're always arranged in a 3x3 grid, as you see there. So they're, roughly 12 inches away from the center line for the first group of 3 on the center line, and then 12 inches away from the center line there, and then 18 inches in, and then spaced out from each other. So it forms kind of an evenly spaced 3x3 grid. And the way this works, it says that, you're trying to control objectives. I assume that this uses the same language as we get in key positions. So you'd have to have an infantry or artillery model present within 3 inches, because, vehicles are allowed to contest, but they're not allowed to control. So I assume this is infantry and artillery. I assume they have to move within 3 inches of the objective, and it has to be uncontested when they move into it in order for them to control. So it has to be only your units. When that unit ends its activation, it has to be within 3 inches and no enemy units. And then it flips to your control. Then at the end of turn 2 and at the end of every turn onwards, for every objective that you control, does not say that you have that is uncontested. For everyone that you control, so getting there first is going to help, you score 3 victory points, and then the objective is removed. So you're not scoring on these every single turn. You score on it, it's gone, it's pulled up. It is now no longer a place you need to be on the board in order to score. That is an important thing. Because with that knowledge, it means getting to someplace first is huge in this scenario. There is a second way to score, which is good because otherwise, if somebody pulled up 5 on turn 2, the game would effectively be over, right? And so, wisely, there's a second thing that's going on, which is that you get an extra victory point for each unit that you remove. So there's a kind of a seek and destroy mixed with key positions going on here effectively, except that the key positions are automatically placed in specific spots, and the key positions are pulled up at certain points. So you're not necessarily taking and holding. It's not the quick and stick that we even talked about in our last video in this series, talking about hold until relieved, right? Where you get onto it, it's what I'm going to call it's swift claiming, right? So you're going to move up really quick, you're going to get onto it, you're going to claim it as yours, you're going to hold onto it until the end of a turn, and then you're going to get it, and then you're going to move on to do removal in another spot, okay? Or I guess hypothetically get to another objective. In my experience, and from what I saw at the event that I went to, by the end of turn 2, they were all claimed and they were all cleared. And then it was just a matter of how many units can you punch off the board, right? And so because of that, I think, obviously transports with big squads in them on turn 1, moving up and into position is a really good thing. Keep in mind, you don't start with prepared positions, and your men starting on the board. You're going to be moving onto the board because this is done through first wave. So keep in mind that in order to move all the way up, you'd need to have 24 inches worth of move to get toward the center. So keep in mind that fast stuff, especially wheeled transports, is going to be a really, really good idea. Okay. This could also be a really great place for motorcycles. Could potentially be a really good place for bicycles as well. If you know that there's going to be roads on the map, go ahead and look at our faux transport theory regarding transporting units video that we did, and then you'll see that there. But being able to move up quickly and swiftly to the center is going to be absolutely essential in this scenario. And really, by the end of turn 2, when you're getting ready to score, you want to be holding on to 5 or more objectives. If you can get 6 or even more than that, it's a very skew build that would get you more than that. But if you could get more than that, then that's the ideal, because then you're starting so far ahead just on objective control that by the time you're getting to removing units, I mean, you could just play the game maneuvering away and going down if you really, really wanted to. Because if you start with 5, 6, 7 objectives, you might be so far ahead that they can't actually remove enough of your guys to actually cost you the game. So in terms of high performance unit, what is it that performs well? First of all, big squads, right? You need to be able to move up onto an objective and stay on it, which means 2, 3, 4, 5-man squads, they may not last very long. Even if they're stubborn and they can avoid being checked on morale and being, and fleeing off the board, you can only sustain so much fire on a 2, 3, 4, 5-man squad. Right. So as much as you might be tempted to be like, okay, I'm going to go for tons of order dice using tons of small units, right? The multiple small unit or MSU approach, that's fine. Just know that 1, you're coughing up a point for every unit that you lose. So there's that. And 2, you need to have guys holding the objective when the enemy is done activating their unit in order for you to retain and keep them from flipping control over one of those objectives. And it's not like you move on to it, you score the points, and then it disappears. It's end of turn 2. So there's time to be able to manipulate and maneuver around your unit and flip control of things to keep you from scoring. Related to this, as we've already kind of alluded to, transports, really good. They're good for moving up men. They're also a great way of challenging the backline objectives that your opponent thinks are safe. Right. And for this, I'm gonna jump back up here to the deployment zone so you can see it. So remember that when you're coming in from first wave, you're not necessarily coming in from your back line. You're coming in from a deployment zone edge, which is that back line, but it can also be those 12 inches on the sides. And so because of that, if you go from a hypotenuse perspective, right, when you're building out triangles effectively, the distance from your deployment zone edge to those middle exterior objectives is, because it's forming basically a triangle, right, with a 12-inch side and an 18-inch side, it comes out to about a 21 and a half, I think it's like 21.6 something or other inches going up from a direct beeline from the very tip of your deployment zone edge to the center of that objective. And you don't have to get to the center of the objective, right? Presumably, it doesn't exactly say in the pack, but we assume it's similar to key positions with claiming objectives, so 3 inches from the edge. That means you don't actually have to move that far, right? I mean, a wheeled vehicle on a run order, even not starting directly at the pinnacle of your deployment zone edge, can run with troops inside of it so it doesn't go anywhere. Maybe it's not all the safest for those guys, but if you have Panzer Grenadiers or something like that who's not going to take a lot of wounds coming out, it's perfectly fine. You rush those guys up, and now suddenly you've got an armored vehicle, because ideally this is an armored transport with a bunch of guys in it that's just parked there, hanging out. You could do that, right? Or you could do an advance order. You move up 12, maybe even 24 inches if you have access to a road. That would be kind of the dream right there. And then pop a bunch of the men out, and now you got multiple units scattered across an area, hopefully with cover, all around there. And they got to remove all of those in order to flip the control, right? And so because of that, transports are really helpful. But they have a secret advantage as well, which is that the distance to those very far back objectives is also not that far. And if you do have access to a road, being able to rush, especially a wheeled vehicle, way up and shoot out there, you probably won't be able to jump your men out, but you might, you never know. If you can go to one of those objectives where, they parked like, a machine gun team and a light mortar team, right? Or something like that, just the token defense for a given objective, because who's going to shoot way up there in order to take it? If you're smart and you run a wheeled vehicle all the way up, and now you've got a ton of troops nearby, and next turn you can get a draw where you can start dropping men out and clearing out people, like you could relatively easily clear one of those objectives near the beginning of turn 2 when the enemy's already started moving up their men. They've spread out. There's not a lot that's going to be able to help. They kind of assumed that those men were going to be able to hold it because that was one of their gimme objectives that they knew they were going to have. You could flip one that's in near your opponent's deployment zone. And if they don't have a plan for how to deal with that, if they don't have troops that are easily on tap to help clear out all of those guys that you dropped over there, I mean, that could be problematic. That could be the game right there on turn 2, because 3 points they counted on is now 3 points for you. That's a 6-point swing, which is really hard to make back up in a game of bolt action. So transports. I'm not saying you absolutely have to have transports in every army in order to win this. I won my match of Pin Grid. I did not have a transport, but I had another way of doing it, which we'll talk about later, to make sure that I started the game with 5 of the objectives. Now, the next thing that I'm going to highly encourage you to take is light armor. Now, this is not surprising. I generally recommend that you take light armor. Things that are damage value 7, damage value 8, those nice earlier war style tanks are quite effective because they're highly affordable firepower. They tend to be quite maneuverable, and a number of them are fast going into this new edition, right? If you're looking for the fast unit, there are some that will surprise you. The Cromwell, which is a medium tank, is the fast tank for the British. But for, the Americans and the Germans so far, the fast tanks have been lighter tanks. And so having something like that gives you the ability to maneuver quickly, to zoom up if you really need to, in order to help root out enemies or stake and claim, make sure that your objective remains yours. These things are fantastic at that. And since you are getting points for removal, lighter tanks also tend to be pretty good at removal for their cost point. Similarly, though, and kind of on the opposite side of the spectrum, you have heavy armor. Heavy armor, especially if they don't have slow, are fantastic in this scenario because claiming objectives and staying on them requires you to have a certain amount of durability, right? If you run up and you claim something with a squad of veteran infantry, but then by turn 2, you can maneuver up a really big behemoth to just park on it, maybe even give some heavy cover to the other infantry you have. Getting you off of that objective is actually going to be quite difficult, especially since they have to get rid of all of you potentially in a certain order so that they end with a unit within scoring range to potentially flip the objective after everything's been removed. So it can be really, really, really good. And it also means there's probably a good incentive on turn 1 not to shoot with it. You're already going to be getting that move and shoot penalty because you're going to have to move on to the board. So in my opinion, it might be worth it with these bigger tanks to just spend the first turn performing a run order, assuming you can. More on that in about 4 minutes. But with those heavy armor pieces, moving them up so they're right there, ready to contest the central objectives. Worst case scenario, the enemy has moved troops on, and for your next one, you perform either a run order to run those men over if you've already put pins on them, or you're advancing up to point blank range and trying to blow everything completely off of that objective once you're there in the center. And then if they happen to be the only thing there, congratulations, it's yours. The other thing that kind of seems a little counterintuitive that is very useful in this one is artillery and machine gun teams. And the reason why is not because they're going to do a great job of controlling objectives for you. They do make fantastic units for parking on objectives that are near your deployment zone. right? So machine gun teams are things that I ran up in order to help claim stuff. Artillery, I tend to just position in places where they're going to help me shoot at other objectives and cover those things instead of actually claiming stuff, because obviously, like, the only way to get them 12 inches in or 18 inches in if you're coming in from the side, in order to actually get the benefit of helping to claim an objective, you'd have to bring a tow, and then that means you'd be towing them on the first turn, then you'd be untowing them and decoupling them on the second turn, and then you'd be shooting on the third turn. I just hate doing that. So personally, I wouldn't do that. But in general, they're going to be more useful for softening and suppressing up the enemy, so that they aren't coming to up their objectives, right? You're pushing them back, because ultimately the nice thing about pin grid is you don't actually have to hold them off for all that long. You just have to make sure that by turn 2 you have control of 5 to 6 objectives, and then from there the game does get an awful lot easier to win. So what units are likely to struggle? As you can see from how scoring works over there on the right-hand side, small infantry teams are going to have a really hard time. If you've got a 2-man squad, a 3-man squad of something, these are going to be relatively easy to remove, which is victory points. They're not going to do a great job at holding objectives near to the middle or pushing up. They're only going to be good at holding backline objectives. And if the enemy concentrates on shooting at them, you could find that you lose a unit that's holding an objective for you. They swoop in units to take it and they flip it, right? Thing we talked about before, which could be the game right there. So because of that, again, and tack onto that, they're not very good at removing units that are claiming things. Like if you have a big squad of veterans, a 2-man squad like a light mortar team or an AT rifle team, a 3-man squad like you got some of those really tiny rifle sections or even a machine gun team, they're going to pin those units, sure. But if that unit just goes down against the attack because they're like, hey, I'm sitting on the objective, I don't need to be doing anything else. Like if they go down, you're not going to remove anybody. To, just full honesty, unless your opponent's rolling trash. And we always assume average rolls for our opponent and competency on the side of our opponent on this channel. You're not going to actually remove them. And if they just choose to stay down the next turn, they're going to swipe all those pins anyway. So the chances that you actually like pin out a unit and remove a unit that way that's really big is highly unlikely. The other unit that's going to struggle is going to be small infantry squads. Same reasons, except that these are generally more expensive, right? These are, 3 to 4-man teams of infantry. Now, there are some exceptions to this, right? Like, you have like a 4-man Soviet dogmine team, right? We did the video on that one recently. I mean, those guys are going to do great because they're going to do decent removal. You can send them down if you really need to. They weren't particularly expensive in the first place. You can field a lot of them. Like those guys are going to do fine. But there are some of those squads, especially if it's just like a 2, 3, or 4-man, say like Felgund Armory squad with pistols, they're not going to do much for you. They're going to be relatively easy to remove. So, just be careful with those. Shirker units in general, because you're probably taking them pretty small. That's kind of why you took them. Are also going to struggle a little bit here just because they're so easy to remove. The pins do add up. You might actually pin that unit out. So, like there's some stuff just to think about and to consider. But the third group of units that are likely to struggle is actually a whole swath of armies in the game. And this is what I was talking about earlier about how there is kind of one skew build that does make this one very difficult to win against. And by simply taking this army, you are starting with a leg up. And that is, units are going to struggle if they are just an army that is facing Italians. And the reason why is, even though the Italian Army Special Rule has been quote unquote nerfed, I don't think it was that bad. Honestly, like technically it's a nerf, but not really. That allows artillery units and other fixed units to be able to run on the first turn in order to get onto the board if they're part of a first wave, which is the case here. Everybody else that's in the army that is not fixed and thus only going to be moving 6 to 12 inches in order to get onto the board, everybody else cannot run. So now they're stuck at an advance rate, which is generally going to be 6, 9, or 12 inches, which means end of turn 1, even if they're coming in from the side, none of them are in scoring range. Absolutely none of them are in scoring range, other than the 3 backline objectives that are closest to the enemy's line. So an Italian army can highly effectively move up and potentially be within scoring range of 4, 5, 6 objectives, especially if they have wheeled transports, of which, by the way, Italy does get some really, really nice wheeled transports. That is a big advantage, because then as long as you're dropping out veteran troops out of each of those transports and you're on those 3 center objectives and 3 backline objectives, if your opponent cannot remove everything you have on one of those objectives before you get more men up to help hold them, they're not going to flip those center objectives. End of turn 2, 6 objectives gets cleared. That's 18 points for one side. The other 9 points, the other three objectives, get cleared for the other side. They now need to outkill you 11 to 1, right? In order to catch up. It's even worse than that. They would need to remove 11 of your units without losing a single unit of their own. If they lose one unit to the Italians, either during those first two turns or after, the number that they need to make up goes up. And that is, from my experience, especially with a smart, competent Italian player, that is going to be very hard to do. So, my opinion, Italians have a big leg up in this one. And the event that I went to, I think there were at least 3, possibly 4 Italian armies that went there. As far as I recall, all of them won pin grid. All of them. Whether they were newer to the game, more casual narrative style players, or whether they were, serious competitive players, they all won. Okay. So just, a thing to keep in mind, there is one army with a substantial advantage here. You do have to run it wisely. You do have to be smart. But depending on how they build it, they could be walking in with a substantial advantage. So be careful. Deployment and terrain considerations that you should have. The first thing that you want to think about is you want to think about central cover, because central cover, of course, is what's going to help you to be safe while you're claiming those middle objectives. You also want to be thinking about deployment zone cover, because you really, really want to make sure that the units you have that are supporting you down the line, suppressing the enemy, and claiming those back 3 objectives, you want to make sure that those units are all safe. So that way you can maintain as many of those as possible. And you want to shoot for at least 5 of them. What I did when I played Pin Grid in a competitive one, I was up against the Soviet army that had tons of submachine guns. They had, things like the Su-76. Like, they had really good units, no doubt about it. But what I was able to do is, because I had cavalry, I was able to send the cavalry out on turn 1 and move pretty far up. Not quite all the way in, but pretty far up on both of the side middle objectives. And then on turn 2, when my opponent rushed forward quickly to try to turn them, I was unable, because they'd already activated, so they couldn't reactive fire, to swoop in, wipe out the unit, regroup so that I'm still within 3 inches, flip it to my control. And then, because of the fact that there was some pretty nice, ruins that could intervene between the cavalry units on both sides, we were able to get heavy cover, which drops down to 5+ save with cavalry, which is fine. But when you're talking veteran cav, he just couldn't remove enough dudes in order to get him. So I pulled up all 3 of the backline ones and 2 of the middle ones, and he was able to rush, a unit of infantry forward and then a T-34 forward. And so, sure enough, I wasn't able to get the middle objective. But at least we had stuff that now had us up 5-4. And then it was just a matter of trading evenly on kills, and that was it, right? So toward that end, think through cover at both of those ranges so that you make sure that your men are not being removed so that you won't score something, okay? Second thing you want to think about is reserves, okay? My recommendation is don't get everybody on the board. You want them up as quickly as possible, because at turn 1, you want to make sure that you're claiming lots of objectives. You want to make sure that you're pressuring other objectives. So that way, if your opponent is able to take stuff near to the center, you can pressure them there, okay? You can't outflank anyway, so it's not like keeping people in reserve is nice, because you can pop them up really, really close to those backline objectives. And since outflanking doesn't come in until the earliest of turn 3, if your opponent has already pulled up all of those back objectives, then it really doesn't matter. Right. It's not like key positions where swooping in behind the enemy where they weren't ready could be really, really big for you. This one, it's not going to make a big difference whatsoever. Roads. So the way roads work in this one, I'm going to highly recommend, again, keeping your road access for half-track and wheeled vehicles. But keep in mind that you want that specifically for transports. Yes, you also want to make sure your attack vehicles can get up, but your transports are going to need that road access so that they can reach far-flung objectives. And this is why I circled 3 of the objectives over on the picture on the right-hand side. I assume, by the way, I'm always assuming that I'm player A, that I'm the one at the bottom, because when I'm like at the table and playing the game, that's the way I see it. So I'm at the bottom and then everything is up to the top of me. So I just kind of always assume that I'm player A for the purpose of these kinds of pictures. If I want to threaten those back objectives, and there is road access, and that road will take me pretty darn close to one of these things, as early as turn 1, I wouldn't do this the first thing off the bat on turn 1, but what I would do, and I'm highly recommending that you do it too, is that near the end of round 1, when you've seen where most of the enemy's forces are, you have a wheeled transport with the guys inside. You can make those guys go down on the first turn if you want to. and you have that wheeled vehicle perform a run order to come on the board, per first wave, it's automatically successful. And you just rush it basically right there, possibly even past where the objective is. So that way, if the enemy's pushed up really aggressively, their units are now going to be intervened and intersecting against their own units, and they're not allowed to fire within an inch of their own men, right? So you shoot past it, but still pretty darn close. And then, first activation you get the next turn, you just give orders to all the men inside, you hop all the guys out, clear out whatever guys are on top of it, and then claim it as yours. And now you've got 2, 3, 4 units, depending on how you build it out and what your style is as regards transports. You can go ahead and check out our transport series if you're interested on that. But if you do that, suddenly you flipped the back objective. And as I've kind of been alluding to throughout the whole thing, if you flip a back objective, you are winning this game. Unless they claimed all the ones in the middle, which again, on turn 2, you at least have a chance to fight over if you want it. But it means you have a chance now to really slant the game. And if you can do that at multiple points in the enemy's backfield, then now they got to split forces in order to divert. They really do need to hold on to those because, again, it's not like they can let it sit. They can't just come back for it when it's convenient. So now you're splitting the enemy forces. Some units that were moving toward the middle thought there were going to be more guys to support them and help them out, potentially hold on to something. Other units are like, oh, no, well, we got to at least make sure we claim those. It's a real disarray for the enemy, all because road access. So don't plug up your roads. There's going to be a thinking that says move your infantry up. You want to make sure you keep them all there, move them around, different things, whatever. Make sure the road stays clear. Okay, the infantry don't get a benefit from being on the roads. Even cavalry don't get a benefit from being on the roads. The one exception to this that we talked about earlier, motorcycles and bicycles do get benefits for being on roads. And if you're taking bicycles, you really want them to be on roads. If that's the case, prioritize. Wheeled vehicles that can move way further on a road go first. Bicycle troops follow after. And that's nice because it also keeps your bicycle troops a little bit safer, which is nice because we paid extra points for the bikes. So we want to get the most out of it that we can. It also means that, if you're able to get a solid transport, especially if it's an armored wheeled transport, they aren't as common, but they do exist for certain nations. If you can rush that thing up, well, now you've got cover, really good cover along the road. So people who are thinking and planning on, oh, I'm just going to move up on that road, that's going to be a nice, long, open range shot for me to make with no cover on it. Well, now the unit that's actually going to be doing the objective claiming, that bicycle unit behind or whatever, well, now they got cover. They got protection. And that's really good. So your strategy on this is what I'm going to refer to as swift and drift. You want to go swiftly onto the objectives, get on it, claim it, hold it until the end of round 2, and then you want to drift off of that toward removing the enemy. That could be drifting forward to kind of headhunt enemy units that are softer and easier to remove out of the enemy's back line. It could be drifting backwards because maybe you claimed so many of these objectives, you got so many of them taken care of and squared away that you really don't need to go and do too much headhunting. You just got to stay alive. So pulling back, making it so they're shooting at longer ranges, it's harder for them to get to point blank range. All of that's going to help you live an awful lot longer. And that could also be useful. So just think of it, again, modulate. You're like the ocean, right? Sometimes you're going to drift up further onto the bank. Sometimes you're going to drift further back. Play it by ear. And then again, you've got that deep strike capability that we just talked about, or challenging objectives that are close to the enemy. In terms of things you're going to want for that, wheel transports, again, because of how far they move, okay? Because you're not always guaranteed to get a road. So being able to have at least a 24-inch move, if not a 40-inch move, in my opinion, is really good. In terms of what you load into them, because we didn't really talk much about that in terms of what you're going on there, I think engineers, this could be a really great place for an engineering platoon. This specific scenario, because if you can pop out dudes with flamethrowers, even if this is the only shot they get, they run out of fuel right after this is done. If you're torching guys to get them off of an objective, and for the rest of the game it's just 2 dudes with pistols hanging out or something like that, just going down in terrain so that way they're safe from enemy fire, that is a perfectly fine use of points, right? If you can get 3 victory points out of the flamethrower teams that you're dropping out of stuff, that's fantastic. Okay, so it can work that way. Could also be a great place for, large numbers of veterans, especially if they have submachine guns, to be able to quickly drop out. They can clear out a unit that's on there and then hold it and stake it. But also just getting rid of them is going to be really tough, right? How much do you shell? How much do you maneuver in closer to them? Because every time you maneuver closer to them, you're getting closer to them shooting you. There's a lot of stuff you can do there, but I think those are going to be kind of the best units you want in there. Something durable, something sticky, something that can really hold onto its own, because there's not going to be a lot of help coming to assist them. And this is typically the part of the video where I would switch to things that I would recommend as a change. Now, Honestly, as regards to the scenario itself, I can't change anything. There's a side of my mind that's a little worried about the Italian advantage going into this thing. But again, that's an Army special rule, and it's one of the few Army special rules they have they can count on is going to happen every single game, right? So in that sense, like I just kind of have to give it to them. That's fine. Glad that they have that. And I want Italian players to be happy because for the longest time in bolt action, they were not. Um, but yeah, that would be the only thing I would really be concerned about. Other than that, it's a very well designed scenario. Lots of different armies can play well. There are advantages to having armor. There's not exclusively advantages to having armor. You still need to have sufficient amounts of infantry in order to move up, claim objectives, and jump out. There's good reasons for transports. There's good reasons for small teams, big teams, for everything. Some of them may just require more work than others. But what do you think? Do you like this? Do you like this scenario? I'm going to leave a link, by the way, down in the doobly-doo below. That'll give you a chance to be able to see you can see the pack. You can download the whole thing. It'll also show you the optional rules that they recommend as things you can pick and choose from, kind of, to solve some potential problems that you have with maybe how people build armies and things like that. If you want to remove some of the spam, if you want to remove some of the crazy, you can do that as well. So go ahead and give them a share. I'm also going to link to Bo Mortensen's channel and his video that he did with David talking about it. So that way you can kind of see some of the thinking behind all of this. And if for whatever reason you've come to my channel without seeing Bo's channel, you should check out Bo's channel because he competes at a much higher level of competition than I do. So he knows a whole lot more about this game than I do. And he's been playing a lot longer than I have. So you should totally follow him as well. Next video in the series, we're going to be looking at another one of these scenarios from the Commander's Compendium, which has a similar 3x3 grid setup, but is very different in really good ways, potentially really weird ways, but we'll talk about that more in the next video. So do feel free to leave your comments down below what you think about Pin Grid, whether you think that it's really well balanced, whether you think that maybe it skews a little too far toward objectives and there could just be some ways nobody can catch up. Just let us know all of your thoughts down in the comments below, and I'll see you next time.